2691 Red Lake. Lord of Shadows. Sunny, how much longer do you need? Jet's voice sounded strained. The battle was still raging around her, and the Shadow Legion was slowly losing ground. The Silent Shades had already vanquished myriad wraiths, but no matter how numerous enemies they destroyed, more and more revealed themselves from the mist. What was worse, torrents of ethereal light sometimes escaped from the Cursed Wanderer's ghostly cutlass, infusing the mist with viridian glow. That meant that there were more wraiths still contained within the soul of Connacht, possibly of them, and that the ranks of the undying army were constantly being replenished. Jet herself was barely holding on. Her battle with the captain of the Dutchman was furious, but at the same time strange. The Great Wraith was dodging and evading all of her attacks instead of facing them directly, while she did everything in her power to keep him at a distance. Despite the harrowing forces unleashed by their clash, neither had received a single wound yet. That was because one strike of the Viridian Cutlass was all it would take to kill Jet. The Cursed Wanderer, meanwhile, was simply too powerful and diabolical to allow her scythe to touch him. Jet had managed to build a solid defense through arduous effort. However, she could not mount an effective offense no matter how hard she tried, and she was trying truly hard, fighting both against the world itself and against her own limits. On the surface, this state of things was beneficial to her. After all, she did not really need to kill the sinister apparition, her task was merely to hold him back. But in reality, the future looked more and more bleak with each passing moment. That was because battles of such intensity usually did not last this long. When a transcendent poured so much of themselves into the battle, going above and beyond to match the power of a superior adversary, the outcome was more likely than not decided in a matter of seconds. Jet, however, had been locked in a furious melee with the Cursed Wanderer for, gods, she did not even know how long. The body and soul might have been unscathed, but her reserves of essence were slowly diminishing. Worse than that, she was growing tired. The encroaching exhaustion was not of the physical kind, but rather a mental one. It took a lot to maintain her mind in a state of utmost focus, and by now, her intense concentration was showing signs of decay. She had not made a mistake yet, but at this rate, one was inevitable. And one mistake was all it took to lose one's life in the world of the nightmare spell. Which was why Jay was trying to find out how much longer she needed to hold. This time, Sunny's voice did not resound from the shadows around her. Instead, Cassie whispered softly into her ear. He found a thread. Now, he just needs to pull on it. There's no telling how long that will take, though. Keep fighting for a little more. Jet gritted her teeth. That's what she said the last time. At that moment, the Cursed Wanderer finally managed to get past her defenses. The mist blade was just a split second late, but that allowed the Great Wraith to evade it and lunged forward with chilling malice. Jet barely managed to position the shaft of her weapon in a way that prevented her adversary from impaling her with his sword. He did not try, though. Instead, the captain of the Dutchman took a rapid step and reached for Jet with his hand. The moment his palm touched the black leather of her armor, Jet screamed. No, it was her body that opened her mouth, threw her head back, and let out a terrifying wail. She had no say in it. In the next moment, it was as if an invisible wall slammed into her. Jet was tossed far back, collided with the Silent Shades, and fell to the ground. She spat a mouthful of blood and weakly rose to her feet. As she looked in the direction of the Cursed Wanderer, her expression darkened. What the hell is this thing? Out there, on the other side of the Palace Lake. Something colossal and terrifying was rising in the mist. Jet cursed quietly. I guess we've run out of luck, after all. The rivers of mangled flesh that had been converging from all across the Eternal City under the awful weight of the crushing finally fused together, forming a second lake, a viscous, red lake of blood and pulverized tissue. The red lake was made up from the obliterated bodies of all the corrupted immortals. It swallowed an entire island, drowning the ruins. Its surface seethed and rippled, enduring the pressure of the crushing. And then, it began to swell. An enormous lump grew in its middle, rising high into the air. From afar, it looked as if a red mountain was growing in the heart of the Eternal City. Then, the mountain burst, and a colossal arm rose into the dark sky of this sunken hell. Jet paled. The bones were formed first, growing at a startling speed. Bloody marrow seeped down, escaping through rapidly disappearing seams. Then, tendons wrapped themselves around the bones, followed by huge ropes of firm muscle. Patches of skin grew atop the muscles, but then, something went wrong. Instead of covering the huge arm entirely, the patches of skin blackened and shrank instead. The muscles contorted and spasmed in a revolting display of deformation, and the bones were twisted. In the end, the colossal arm remained incomplete, or possibly simply different, towering above the ruins like a profane monument. Blood flowed down its immense length, and a rot was spreading through its tissue. The huge arm resembled that of someone who had recently been flayed. Then, it fell, allowing its palm to press against the ruins. And another one was unleashed. Together, they began to pull the body of the flesh of Connacht out of the Red Lake slowly. 2692 Birth of a Titan. An enormous being slowly rose from the Red Lake, absorbing it. After the two gigantic arms, a back with a bent spine showed itself next. Then, the top of a bloody skull, uneven shoulders, and an endlessly stretching torso. Finally, two towering legs were formed from the last remains of the lake, ending in stumped feet. The being crawled across the ruins, pressed into them by the crushing, then opened its maw and let out a dreadful, deafening, tortured wail. The twitching muscles on the creature's gigantic arms contracted once again, and it slowly pushed itself off the ground. Hell, in the next moment, Jet had no more time to study the titanic figure of the newly evolved flesh of Connacht. The captain of the Dutchman appeared from the mist, and a split second later, his cutlass was already flying through the air to cut off her head. Jet felt like she was drowning in her own blood, but she still managed to evade, mumbling curses as she struggled to draw a breath. She had to dedicate her entire focus to battling the Great Wraith once more. And yet, the image of the newborn Titan remained in her mind, as if burned into it. That thing looked like a huge human, or rather, like a failed attempt to create a human. Its titanic body was horrid and misshapen and covered in patches of disgusting rot. The creature's skin was entirely missing, revealing contorting muscles that were constantly seeping blood. Its deformed skull was half buried in slithering flesh, with a lower jaw that hung askew, barely attached to the rest of its face with rotting cartilage. There was no intelligence in the deep dark pits of its missing eyes, just bestial and hungry lights. Jet did not know whether the ghastly state of the flesh of Connacht was due to the crushing or simply due to the rot of corruption that permeated it. What she did know, however, was that the abhorrent thing was, without a doubt, a Titan. As she fought the cursed wanderer, the flesh of Connacht slowly rose to its feet and straightened. Its size was so enormous that its head almost reached the roof of the invisible dome, the same size as the monumental edifice of the palace. Damn it, things we not looking good for them. Out there across the lake, the flesh of Connacht let out another groan of ague on you and took an earth-shattering step forward. At the same time, the cursed wanderer landed another blow, sending Jet flying back. She fell on the ground and rolled, feeling blood streaming down her face. Her vision turned blurry as the blood got into one of her eyes, burning it. Not too far away, Knave's harpoon shattered, leaving him unarmed. The dark castle warily moved back as the Wraith army advanced up the shore of the palace island. The Shadow Legion was dwindling, and with every shade it lost, its eventual defeat seemed more and more cemented. In the east, hidden from view by the soaring mass of the palace, flashes of blinding white light were getting closer and closer to the shore. Nephis was being pushed back, as well. Jet winced and spat out blood, turning into a wraith and shifting away to avoid the deadly blow of the Viridian cutlass. Assuming her human form again, she raised the mist blade and pointed it at the cursed wanderer tiredly. She wasn't feeling too well. "Sonny, are you perhaps about done?" There was a second of silence, and then Cassie's voice resounded in her head once again. "He needs a few more minutes." Jet sighed. "At this rate, they'll all be dead in a few more minutes." The expedition and its reinforcements could face the madness of Connacht, the flesh of Connacht, or the soul of Connacht and its master, but not all of them at the same time. If they wanted to last several minutes in this hell, one of their enemies had to die. Looking at the cursed wanderer, Jet grinned and slowly lowered the mist blade. As she did, the long war scythe changed form, turning into a black khopesh and robbing her of her reach advantage. The mist turned frigidly cold, and a layer of ice formed on the shattered ground. She grasped her sickle sword and lowered her stance a little, looking at her adversary with a dark intensity. "Your heart once told me to surrender and succumb, you know." Her grin widened a little. Guess who succumbed in the end? As the flesh of Connacht took another step, approaching the palace lake, the cursed wanderer lunged forward. Jet did, as well. In the depths of the palace, Sunny had stepped through the shadows and moved past the floor of the vast circular pit. There was nothing but solid metal beneath it, stretching for about 100 meters down. The reach of his suppressed shadow sense just barely allowed him to perceive a hollow space below, Appearing under its ceiling, he cursed and prepared to plummet down. There was another great hall hidden under the seal chamber, this one entirely circular in shape, with no doors leading into its vast expanse. Sunny expected to fall down, but to his surprise, he didn't. In fact, he felt oddly weightless, drifting in the air. Well, not exactly air. There was no air in the spherical hall to speak of, only the cold void of vacuum. There was no gravity, either, so Sunny found himself in a peculiar state of falling endlessly while standing in place. Summoning a tentacle out of shadows, he pulled himself to the roof of the hall, or its floor, depending on perspective, and manifested another shadow in a thin layer on the sole of his boot, instilling an adhesive quality to its composition. Stepping onto the cold metal, he found himself sticking to it. He looked around. How is this possible? All around him, there stood shadows. They were the shadows of the immortals of the Eternal City. 2693 Void Chamber. Cold. The vacuous chamber was filled with nothing but stark light, shadows, and unbearable cold. Even Sunny, whose supreme body was encased in the soulbound carapace of the jade mantle, could feel all warmth swiftly draining from his body. At the same time, he raised a hand. His palm was drowning in impenetrable darkness, while the back of his hand was shining with radiant light. It had turned luminous in the fierce torrents of blinding radiance that poured between the shadows, on the verge of turning to ash. Feeling his skin starting to blister beneath the sublime jade, Sunny grimaced and hid his hand in the shadows. The vast spherical chamber was drowned in the radiance of a fierce silver conflagration that burned in its center, suspended in the vacuum like a miniature star. In fact, perhaps it was a star, just like the one imprisoned inside the lighthouse. If so, this one was even smaller, so much so that Sunny could easily grasp it with his hands. Of course, he would be incinerated long before reaching its radiant halo. The vast emptiness of the chamber, the deep shadows, the luminous flame burning in the center of the dark void like a beating heart. It was like a miniature model of the void and the flame of desire, almost. The shadows of the immortals stood silently on the concave walls of the chamber, bathed in starlight, lonesome and lost. Most of them belonged to humans, but some resembled beasts. Some were small, others were vast. Some, Sunny recognized, the rest of them were unfamiliar. Ha! He wanted to chuckle, but no sound escaped from his lips. After all, there was no air in the chamber, so nothing could carry his voice. So the old man was right, after all. Back at the lighthouse, Nightwalker joked that the demon of repose drew inspiration from the curse Shadow God had placed upon Connacht when designing the Eternal City. He turned out to be more right than any of them had imagined. This is her sorcery. Connacht had been denied death, cursed to exist forever devoid of its final embrace, therefore, he did not have a shadow. Shadow God had taken it away. So, this was how the demon of repose had created her immortals, as well. She had separated them from their shadows and then sealed the shadows in the heart of the palace, preventing them from both returning to their owners and making the journey to the shadow realm. That was why the prisoners of the Eternal City were immortal. They could not die because their deaths existed somewhere else. Their deaths were in front of Sunny. Of course, he had no idea how the demon of repose had managed to sever living beings from their shadows without killing them. Neither did he know how she had been able to trap the orphaned shadows and overcome the pull of the shadow realm. Apart from that, Sunny could only guess why the buildings of the Eternal City endlessly restored themselves, as well. What was sustaining the dome above the city? How was the destructive heat of the imprisoned stars contained? Was it harvested? And what means had the demon of repose used to realize her sorcery? Sunny did not know any of these details. However, he did not need to know all the answers to make a mess of things. Destroying something was far easier than creating it, after all. Especially because Sunny was uniquely suited to destroy this particular manifestation of divine sorcery. Before that, though, he had to solve another problem. A very serious problem. Ah, damn it all. The void chamber had been created to trap shadows. And Sunny was a shadow. His shadow sense was flawlessly contained within the sphere of starlight and darkness, so he could not use shadow step. He could not travel to the waking world, either. He could not summon his shadows or call upon his shades. In fact, he could not do anything to leave this empty place at all. The void chamber had been created to cut off a part of the world from the universal laws of existence, after all. It was a place that barred passages to the shadow realm, so HOW was a mere supreme supposed to escape it. Sunny remained motionless for a short while, then walked across the metal surface of the chamber's wall by alternating the adhesive nature between the soles of his boots. Reaching the nearest shadow, he reached out to it. Nothing happened when he touched it. Nothing happened when he commanded it to enter his soul and submit to him, either. However, when he cajoled and soothed it quietly, it hesitantly turned to him, and then vanished without a trace. A new shade was added to his legion. That was promising enough. Sadly, it was also not going to help him make the dreadful immortals mortal once again quick enough, simply because there was a myriad of them in the void chamber, and he could not afford himself the luxury of convincing each one to submit individually. Sunny walked among the orphaned shadows, looking around intently and absorbing them into his soul one after another. He was searching for something, but at the same time, he was thinking fiercely about how to escape this place. Eventually, Sunny stopped and lowered his head for a moment. Then, he glanced up with a dark smile. All right, then, it was not a problem. He figured out how to destroy the sorcery of the Demon of Repose, and the solution was simple. Since the orphaned shadows could not travel to the Shadow Realm, he was going to bring the Shadow Realm to them. As the light of the star burning in the center of the void chamber grew a little dimmer, Sunny raised a hand and summoned a particular memory. Of course, it was the Shadow Lantern. Thus spoke Weaver. They will open the gates. Grasping the Shadow Lantern in his hand, he opened its gate, the Gate of Shadow, drew his arm back, and then tossed the lantern toward the center of the chamber. As soon as the Gate of Shadow opened, it was as if an invisible ripple spread through the vast, vacuous expanse. As if a cold wind blew across the space that had no air. A powerful pull descended upon the spherical chamber like a reverse crushing. Of course, it only affected the shadows. All of them turned to the delicate stone lantern simultaneously. And then, the first of them was suddenly sucked into its open gate. 2694 Call of Shadow. Ah, crap, the Shadow Lantern was a divine memory, but it had always been subtle and understated. Usually, nothing flashy really happened when Sunny opened its gate. In fact, nothing happened at all. It was on him to either command or coax shadows into entering or call them back from the other side. That was not what was transpiring at the moment, though. As soon as the Gate of Shadow opened, a strange ripple spread through the void chamber, and the blinding radiance of the immolating star imprisoned in its center seemed to dim a little. A powerful pull descended upon the shadows, drawing them toward the Shadow Lantern, which drifted away from Sunny in the weightlessness while spinning slowly. Then, the Shadow Lantern suddenly froze in place, rooting itself into the world like a pillar of existence. That was when the trouble began. Everything seemed to stand still for a moment, and then the world shook. What the? Sunny lost his balance and fell to his knees. Raising his head, he glanced at the distant Shadow Lantern with wide eyes. Its small gate suddenly seemed vast and boundless like the realm of death itself, and the subtle pull it was exerting on the orphaned shadows turned annihilating. More than that, it was growing more overwhelming with each moment. Even Sunny was dragged into the air, only managing to hold himself in place by sinking the claws of his armored gauntlet into the metal floor. All around him, the shadows of the immortals, hundreds of thousands of them, were slowly floating upward, pulled toward the boundless darkness of the Gate of Shadow. It was like a dark, twisted version of the Rapture. The laws of existence had been defied by the stubborn will of the Demon of Repose for untold eons, and now, the universe seemed to be zealously correcting itself, using the Shadow Lantern as its conduit. At least that was what it felt like to Sunny, who found himself caught in that violent process. The fierce white star was still burning in the heart of the void chamber, but now, there was an opposite singularity mirroring it, a flawlessly dark dot that was pulling everything toward itself. Shadows were pouring into the maw of the Shadow Lantern, and it seemed as if it was consuming the torrents of blinding stellar light with them. With every shadow that passed through the Gate of Shadow, the radiant light of the imprisoned star was growing a little dimmer. Not good. Sunny had thought that the Shadow Lantern was only exerting its pull on the shadows, but when the metal floor he was clinging to deformed and bent upward, he realized that he was wrong. The entire place seemed to be slowly imploding. Outside the palace, Cassie was standing on the walls of the Dark Castle. The harrowing battle between the allied forces of the Flame and Shadow domains and the dreadful union of the remnants of Connacht was raging all around her, but she was suddenly distracted by something else. A drop of something cold had just landed on her head. Raising a hand, Cassie brushed her fingers across her forehead and then brought them to her lips. She tasted salt, not blood, water. Raising her head as if wishing to gaze at the dark sky, she frowned. She had to wait for one of her marks to do the same before she could see anything. Drops of water were falling down on the vast ruins of the Eternal City, splashing against the rubble here and there, as if it was about to rain. Naturally, it was impossible for rain clouds to gather above the sunken city. Which could only mean one thing. Sunny. What the hell did you do? It could only mean that the dome above the Eternal City was failing. His voice resounded in her head a moment later. Well, about that, do you remember how I promised to unravel the sorcery of repose? I think. Far away, in the heart of the palace, Sunny's avatar rippled and turned into the four-armed devil, using all his claws and even his tail to hold onto the bending floor. I think I succeeded a little bit too hard. Sunny cursed under his breath and rushed across the imploding void chamber, looking around frenetically. The luminous star was slowly losing its radiance, while the black gate facing it seemed to be becoming darker and darker. It was like a spherical rift in the fabric of existence by now, surrounded by a flowing halo of light that disappeared into its vast darkness. The void chamber was gradually growing smaller as it collapsed on itself. Where are you? Where the hell are you? Sunny's gaze was jumping between the floating shadows. His other senses were searching, as well. He had almost made a full circle around the imploding chamber by the time he finally found what he was looking for. Found you. Sunny wanted to shout, but there was no air in his lungs, and none for him to inhale anywhere around. Hesitating for a moment, he let go of the deformed metal floor and launched himself into the air. The gate of shadow pulled him toward it with frightening force, but he had accounted for its draw already. Flying across the maelstrom of stellar radiance and deep darkness, he reached a particular shadow and grabbed it. Grabbing a shadow seemed like an impossible feat, but he willed his hand to do just that against all reason. Sorry, buddy, it's not time for you to find peace yet. The shadow he grabbed belonged to Nightwalker. Twisting in the air, Sunny manifested a heavy kunai linked to a black chain in his hands and threw it back toward the caving floor. The kunai pierced deep into the weakened metal, and Sunny held to the chain for his dear life, relying on it to keep him from falling into the frightening black hole of the Gate of Shadow. It was not time to leave the chamber yet. Hold on tight. He did not say those words aloud, and the Shishadao of Nightwalker would not have heard him, anyway. But it seemed to grow still in his grasp. The void chamber was slowly coming undone around them. And around the chamber, the palace was coming undone as well. 2695 A castle built on fog. A grotesque laughter surrounded Neffys as she flew above the lake, illuminating its turbulent surface with her radiance. She had long assumed the form of the spirit of flame, wielding the blessing to battle the madness of Connacht. The ancient nightmare creature was like a vast cloud of smoke and black dust that constantly changed and shifted, obscuring hundreds of twisted forms that seemed to be hidden in its dark depths. It had no claws, no fangs, and no hands to wield deadly weapons. However, it had no blood to be spilled, no heart to be pierced, and no head to be severed either. Its form was whatever madness consumed its enemies, and its power was whatever obsession made them weak. The delusions given form by the black dust wielded monstrous strength, capable of shattering mountains and ripping titans apart. What truly made the madness of Connacht frightening, however, was the terrifying onslaught of insidious mental attacks it unleashed upon its victim. Neffys could feel it as she invoked the name of destruction and channeled her flames through the blessing, summoning a fierce firestorm, a malevolent presence invading her mind to infest it with a ghastly delirium. Tormented by unbearable pain and dazed by the encroaching delusion, she chillingly commanded the storm of flames to swallow the billowing expanse of black smoke. The madness of Connacht laughed louder as it burned. More, burn me more, hurt me more, more, more. The vast cloud was incinerated, turning into a maelstrom of ash. However, a second later, the ash turned into smoke and black dust again, flowing forward like a flood to swallow her. That was the worst of it. No matter how many times Neffys destroyed the madness of Connacht, it never seemed to die. Did you know, Nephilim? An avalanche of devastating blows rained on her from all sides, forcing Neffys to dance in the air with her sword to defend herself. I've never met anyone as mad as you. Neffys cut the world with her will, creating a rift in the boundless expanse of the madness of Connacht. She escaped its dark vastness and spun to deliver another strike. A torrent of white flames spanning hundreds of meters fell from above, severing the black cloud in two. As soon as it touched the water, a deafening explosion rang, and everything became enveloped in steam. I draw power from madness, and your mind, ah, what a delicacy, what a feast. A moment later, the madness of Connacht was already mended and rushed forward to push her closer to the shore. Neffys suppressed a groan, disoriented by the blinding pain of her flaw. She was usually better at enduring it, but her mind was weakened by the constant assault of the vile delirium. Ah, they had assumed that the delirium consuming her mind was strictly an attack meant to infect and debilitate her, but as it turned out, its main purpose was the opposite. It used her own mind to strengthen the madness of Connacht. Neffys knew that she was not the most normal person. Her desires had always bordered on obsession, and her resolve had always been far more extreme than that of most people, all people, really, as far as she could tell. On top of that, she was supreme, and all supremes had to be a little mad to sustain the heavy weight of their unreasonable defiance. So, if the madness of Connacht drew power from the derangement of its victims, it could gain quite a lot from her. But Neffys had invoked the name of passion at the start of their battle, adding fuel to her already scathing desires. That was a way to strengthen her will, but it had also inadvertently granted her enemy a far greater boon. No wonder the fiend was so dreadfully strong. It is strange, though. The madness of Connacht descended upon her like a swarm of horrors, making the lake boil. There is so much of you missing. Your mind is a ruin already, through no effort of my own. Who maimed you that way? Neffys measured the remaining distance to the palace island and frowned. How was she going to win this battle? What do you mean? Despite her torment and mental anguish, her voice remained even. A sinister growl resounded from within the harrowing black cloud, washing over her like a wave. There are holes everywhere here. There are things missing. It is as if someone tore out half of your heart and replaced it with fog. How can a castle stand on fog? Ah, I've never seen such a strange creature before. Neffys hesitated for a split second. Was he talking about the gaps left in her memory after the tomb of Ariel? How did it know? And what did it know? No. What had that thing said? It had seemed important. That split second of hesitation was enough for a crushing blow to land on her radiant body, infecting the white flames with swirls of darkness. She let out a scream, which drowned in the grotesque laughter of the madness of Connacht. You and I are not that different, are we? Burning the infection out of herself, Neffys allowed the pain to cleanse her mind and unfolded her wings. The black dust around her melted, and the smoke was immolated. Air itself combusted, causing a destructive chain reaction and creating a bubble of cold vacuum. Embraced by the deadly cold, Neffys raised the blessing. At this point, the wisest choice was to release the name of passion and rob her enemy of some of its power. Her radiant figure blazed with merciless light as the air, the smoke, and the black dust rushed into the vacuum. You feed on madness, she smiled. Let's see how much you can eat, then. With that, she invoked the names. The name of hatred, the name of love, the name of despair, the name of courage, the name of wrath. She called upon every passion and its every shade, drowning herself in unbearable, overwhelming emotions. She let herself be consumed by madness. The madness of Connacht reeled. 2696 cog in the machine. What the hell? Why is it raining? A heavy downpour was descending on the ruins of the Eternal City. The drops of water seemed to move slowly as Jet staggered back, barely keeping her balance. Her face was smeared with blood, and her body was broken, and yet, she was still full of fight. Now that the mist blade had assumed the form of a khopesh, she did not have the advantage of reach anymore. The cursed wanderer was still avoiding letting their blades cross, which held him back, but he had managed to land far more attacks with his fists and feet now, as well as his elbows, knees, shoulders, and forehead. The bastard really knew his hand-to-hand combat. It was as if he had spent thousands of years doing nothing but participating in fistfights. How come? Groaning quietly, Jet turned her torso to avoid the ghostly cutlass and counterattacked, trying to sink her sword into the ethereal body of the great wraith. The rain made it harder to see. In front of her, the flesh of Connacht had already reached the palace lake and stepped into it. The water barely reached its knees, and the enormous monstrosity waded through it, painting the lake red. Now that it was not slowed down by the crushing anymore, it was advancing faster. Around Jet, the Shadow Legion was being pushed back by the endless tide of wraiths. Worse than that, the army of silent shadows was also shrinking. There were barely half of them left by now. Behind Jet, meanwhile, was she imagining things, or were the walls of the palace faintly bending inward? What did he do? She could not be sure, but was pretty much convinced that the Lord of Shadows had done something insane. Not that it mattered to her, at the moment. All that mattered was defeating the soul of Connacht and its master. Jet forced out a smile as she dove under the whistling cutlass and tried to strike it with the mist blade from below. The cursed wanderer pulled his sword back with impossible speed, easily avoiding her trap, and slammed his palm into her abdomen. Arg! This time, something vital ruptured inside of her. A torrent of blood flowed from her mouth, and Jet staggered back once again. Can you give me a moment? She grinned through the pain. The sinister apparition did not wait until she recovered, naturally. He moved forward, intending to use her wounded state and finish her off. If one thought about it, Getting beaten that badly but somehow failing to die was quite an achievement. Then again, she had been dead this whole time. The cursed wanderer was making a mistake if he thought he could cut her down that easily, though. He must have made a judgment about the power of his enemies based on what the Silent Shadows and the champions of the Shadow Legion could do, but Jet was neither. Jet was a proud subject of the human domain. So, just as her body was about to fail her, a soft glow suffused her skin, and a pleasant warmth permeated her body. Embraced by Nef's purifying flames, Jet was healed and mended, restored to flawless health. That was the blessing of the human domain and its radiant, distant ruler. That was the power of the immortal flame, of the unquenchable longing. Of course, Nef's power was not absolute. She had to be paying attention to heal those who served her, and even her boundless supply of soul essence was not really inexhaustible. However, Jet was one of the special few who always enjoyed her attention. That was her privilege as a former member of Changing Stars cohort and an irreplaceable cog in the great machine of humanity. The cursed wanderer did not expect his enemy to suddenly be healed, so he fell into a momentary disadvantage. That was Jet's chance to end this fight, or at least lay the foundation of his defeat. Sadly, she failed. No matter how unexpected her recovery was, the Great Wraith was simply too powerful to be taken down. He easily avoided the Mist Blade, then unleashed a flurry of attacks upon Jet. Deadly attacks rained on her from all sides, as if the bastard was in several places at the same time. By the time severed drops of rain fell to the ground, Jet was bruised and battered once again, and white radiance enveloped her figure once more. Damn it, she threw a calculating gaze at the approaching colossus of mangled flesh. Time was running out. In fact, there was almost no time left at all. Which meant that she had to do something drastic. The hilt of the black khopesh lay comfortably in her hand. This was the form of the mist blade that contained the soul of the heart of Connacht, the most powerful soul in her possession. Because of that one soul, the mist blade was akin to a supreme weapon of the 4th tier instead of being equal to Jet's own rank and class. It also infused the mist blade with a special ability. All souls it bound did, but the heart of Connacht granted Jet an especially potent one. It was the ability to stop the flow of time for everyone except herself for one heartbeat. Needless to say, such an ability was incredibly deadly. However, it was not without drawbacks, the main being that it consumed pretty much all of her essence. For somebody else, that might have been merely inconvenient, but for Jet, it was fatally perilous. It meant that she had to be certain that she would be able to kill something in that single heartbeat. If she did, their death would nourish her arid soul. If not, she would die instead. The risk was real and palpable. The situation, however, was similarly desperate. And since Jet had known that it would become desperate, she transformed the mist blade into a khopesh in advance. Can kill that fiend instantly? Jet wasn't sure, but she was willing to find out. 2697 Wraith Gambit. Cassie, that thing is getting closer. Out there beyond the calamitous battle, the flesh of Connacht had already reached the middle of the lake. The Dream Gate had long vanished, and nothing stood between it and the shattered shore. The titanic horror gazed down, an eerie malice emanating from the dark, bleeding chasms of its empty eye sockets. Its dislocated jaw swayed, putting strain on the elastic bands of muscle holding it in place. What the hell, damn, why is this thing so creepy? Jet retreated from the ghostly blade of the cursed wanderer, knowing that she could not escape it much longer. The dwindling formation of the Shadow Legion had been pushed back, retreating all the way to the walls of the Dark Castle. If she took another step back, their defeat would become inevitable. Don't worry about the Titan, Jet. You have enough on your plate. Jet smiled. Cassie was undoubtedly right. Torrential rain was falling onto the ruins of the Eternal City. The Ivory Island was frozen in the dark sky above the palace, surrounded by cascading waterfalls. The palace itself was slowly collapsing in on itself, its metal walls groaning as they bent inward. Just then, another blinding white flash illuminated the world. This time, however, it did not dim, only growing brighter. It was as if a sun was rising from behind the crumbling palace. The Eternal City was welcoming day for the first time since it sank to the bottom of the Stormzea. It seemed like Nephis was getting serious. It's now or never, I suppose. Jet glanced at the cursed wanderer with cold, calculating malevolence. Could she do it? Could she not? The bound soul of the heart of Connacht granted her the ability to freeze time for a single heartbeat, at least that was how the spell described it. A heartbeat was an unreliable measure of time, though. Different hearts beat at different rates depending on the circumstances, after all. Jet's heart, for example, did not beat at all at times. So, it would be more accurate to say that she would be able to move in the frozen time for a single moment. Could Jet slay the sinister apparition in a single moment? She did not know. Worse than that, she did not know if the cursed wanderer would remain still when she froze time. He had usurped the power of the soul of Connacht, which meant that he had also usurped its will. And those who wielded the will could often resist the powers of those who did not. As Jet looked at the cursed wanderer, her gaze kept being drawn to the ghostly cutlass glowing with an ethereal viridian glow in his hand. The soul of Connacht. Just then, it flashed with a cold halo of viridian light. The light drowned in the mist, and countless spectral figures suddenly became visible in it, ready to join the Wraith army's assault. Ah, to hell with this. She lunged forward. What's the worst that can happen? I'll die. Jet could not help but smile at her own joke as she delivered a recklessly powerful downward cut with the mist blade. The great wraith avoided it easily by taking a step back. A moment later, he would regain solid footing and use the opening created by her reckless attack to launch his own, probably delivering her a deadly blow. But, Jet reached into the mist blade and activated the ability granted to it by the Heart of Connacht. That deadly blow would have to come in 2 seconds, no one. The flow of time around her came to an abrupt halt. The gigantic, monstrous figure of the flesh of Connacht stopped mid-step. Drops of rain froze in the air. The mist ceased its swirling advance, suffused with ethereal light. The flood of eerie wraiths became a motionless canvas, the crumbling phalanx of black shades became a still painting drawn against its background with ink. The soul of Connacht was slowly swelling with another flash of viridian light. In the frozen time, only one thing moved, Jet. She pulled her sword back up, aiming to pierce the cursed wanderer's chest. But then, the sinister apparition suddenly moved, as well. Slowly, he shifted his gaze and stared directly at Jet. His torso began to turn, and the hand holding the ghostly cutlass started to move forward. Bastard! Jet tried to calculate if she would be able to strike him, still. Would one strike be enough? The cursed wanderer was a corrupted devil, which meant that he had 4 soul cores. Souls usually collapsed long before all of their cores were destroyed, but would the same hold true for a wraith, a naked soul infused with malevolent will? Can I cut him 4 times in one heartbeat? Jet felt that she could, even if she was not entirely confident. But her gaze kept turning to the soul of Connacht. In the end, she wasted her heartbeat to consider it silently, and then turned into a wraith herself. Time resumed its flow. The flesh of Connacht took a step. Drops of rain fell to the ground. The mist swirled as it washed over the ferocious violence of the battle between the Shadow Legion and the Wraith army. The ghostly cutlass shot toward Jet's heart. However, it never pierced it. Because as soon as time resumed its flow, the mist blade slashed across the cursed wanderer's wrist, severing it. The sinister apparition's hand, as well as the soul of Connacht grasped in it, soared into the air. Reaching forward, Jet grabbed the hilt of the ghostly cutlass. As soon as it was in her grasp, she dashed back while holding both swords in her hands. The mist blade in one, the soul of Connacht in the other. Jet created some distance between herself and the cursed wanderer, then landed on the ground and glanced at him with a dark smile. You did not like that, did you? The great wraith silently lunged forward. He was a little bit late, though. Jet glanced down, at the hand that held the soul of Connacht. Somehow, her hand looked even less substantial than usual. It was rapidly growing blurred, like a wisp of mist being dispelled by the wind. And, drawn into the ominous viridian cutlass. Jet's smile dimmed a little. Crap. In the next moment, she vanished in a flash of ethereal light. The ghostly cutlass clattered to the broken ground. 2698 metal coffin. In the void chamber of the palace, what used to be the void chamber, Sunny let out a silent scream as the vast space around him was slowly turning into a narrow metal coffin. It felt like the fabric of reality itself was coming undone around him as the shadows, the light, and the world itself were being drawn into the impenetrable black maw of the Gate of Shadow. The star that used to burn in the center of the chamber was barely giving off any light by now, having turned into an luminous sphere of liquid flame. With every moment, it was growing dimmer and dimmer. The chamber itself, meanwhile, had long lost its spherical shape. Its walls bent inward in jagged mounds of folded metal, coming closer and closer together. He was still clinging to a black chain, holding to it with all his supreme strength. However, the smaller the void chamber grew, the closer he came to the halo of flowing light that surrounded the shadow lantern. Sunny had no faith in the strength of the chain, either, even though he had manifested it himself. Damnation! Throwing a tense look at the terrifying black rift of the Gate of Shadow, Sunny gritted his teeth. In truth, he did not have to fear the Shadow Lantern. He could simply let go of the chain and fall into its gate, traveling to the Shadow Realm with the RE Street of the Shadows. In fact, that would even be beneficial to him. It was going to take a bit of time for the Shadow Realm to destroy all these orphaned shadows, so in the meantime, he could draw more of them into his soul and establish a new contingent within the Shadow Legion. But there were two reasons why Sunny was stubbornly refusing to let go. One of them was the shadow of Nightwalker that he was holding in one of his 4 hands. He was still hellbent on bringing the legendary hero of the first generation back from the dead, and the shadow was most likely Nightwalker's ticket home. So, Sunny refused to sacrifice him to the final mercy of the Shadow Realm. The second reason was the subtle, but familiar sensations he started to feel once the walls of the Void Chamber started to cave. It was the feeling of his blood responding to something that was hidden nearby. Sunny could not be sure, but he was quite confident that the fragment of Weaver's lineage was somewhere here, in the crumbling chamber. The problem was that he could see no obvious place where the fragment would be hidden. After all, the Void Chamber was simply a hollow sphere of metal with smooth walls. Unless Weaver had placed a piece of his lineage into one of the shadows, there was seemingly nowhere here to hide it. Damn demon! That damn demon! Struggling against the irresistible pull of the Gate of Shadow, Sunny strained his muscles and grasped the black chain with 2 more of his found hands. Then, muttering silent curses, he arduously pulled him up its length. The walls continued to collapse as he did. Hold there, buddy. The shadow of Nightwalker dangled from his 4th hand, seemingly indifferent to what was happening around it. The Gate of Shadow was drawing it into the darkness nonetheless, so Sunny had to endure twice the attraction. Sunny climbed the chain slowly, reached the deformed mess of metal that used to be smooth once, and sank all his claws into it. The shadow spawn form was perfect for hanging from the ceiling, so he managed to brace himself against it and hold on. Must hold. The Void Chamber used to be vast, but now, the formless chaos of its bent walls was drawing close to each other. The ancient metal seemed to be rippling and flowing like a current as it was drawn closer and closer to the Shadow Lantern, losing integrity in the process. Sunny could already feel weaknesses in the metal, jagged rifts that led into the depths of the palace, away from the collapsing chamber. He was not ready to try to escape into one of those rifts yet. It was growing darker around him. Soon the entire palace was quaking. Feeling its death throes and observing the deluge of rain outside its breaking walls, Sunny came to a curious conclusion. He realized that the shadows imprisoned in the Void Chamber were not only how the Demon of Repose had made living beings immortal, but also the source of power that fueled the sorcery of the Eternal City. The shadows fueled the star, somehow, and the star powered the sorcery of repose. Now that the shadows were escaping into the realm of death, though, the star was weakening. And as it weakened, so did the Eternal City. All parts of it, including the protective dome that kept the Stormsia at bay. That's problematic. There was no telling what kind of dreadful devastation would befell the Eternal City once at least a small part of its dome failed completely. The fierce star burning in its heart seemed on the verge of being extinguished by then. Its radiant radiance dimmed so much that Sunny could actually look at it without being blinded. Which he did, searching for something with fervent intensity. Don't tell me. And there, previously obscured by the blinding light and currents of incinerating stellar flame, Sunny saw a black dot that was not supposed to exist. He stared at it for a few seconds, stunned. Weaver, that bastard, had the nebulous demon hidden a part of the forbidden lineage in the heart of a damned star. Sunny knew that he was probably not supposed to be surprised, let alone appalled, but nevertheless, he was. He was certain that the small object hovering in the very heart of the dying star was the fragment of Weaver's lineage. So, now, all he had to do was grab it without turning to ash and escape this place in one piece. 2699 Event Horizon. What to do, what to do? Clinging to the crumbling shell of the Void Chamber, Sunny peered at the vaguely noticeable item hidden in the heart of the dying star. The world was coming undone around him as the hungry maw of the Shadow Realm devoured it. The integrity of the imploding chamber had been compromised a long time ago, allowing air to rush in. Because of that, he could hear once more. What surrounded him was a deafening, penetrating, dreadful hiss that was low and loud enough to sound like a fierce roar. It was as if he heard the otherworldly voice of the Shadow Realm itself, and since the Shadow Realm was the corpse of the god of death, Sunny wondered if that was what his voice had sounded like, as well. The metal was groaning as it was torn and pulled apart. What Sunny remembered while looking at the dying star of the Eternal City was not the Shadow Realm and its cold expanse, though. He remembered the conflagration of divine flames burning in the endless expanse of the sky below, and the pain he had suffered after being burned by them. Was he going to burn once more today? Even if I am, let's do it, I guess. Gritting his teeth, he summoned a pair of black wings and then let go of the chain. Immediately, the pull of the Gate of Shadow grasped him like an inescapable vice. Sunny found himself plummeting down, or perhaps up, with awful speed, barely able to control the direction of his fall, or ascension. As he drew closer to the dying star, terrible heat washed over him. Then, the heat became unbearable. And then, it became impossible. Arg, Sunny regretted inhaling, because his lungs were instantly seared. His wings caught fire first, black feathers igniting and turning to ash a moment later. The jade mantle withstood the stellar radiance for a while, but then, incandescent cracks slowly spread across its surface. The outward layers of the stone-like metal began to melt. The shadow of Nightwalker grew smaller, shielded from the blinding light by the towering figure of the Shadow Spawn. And it all hurt like hell, naturally. Ah, damn it, I miss Antarctica. Sunny wanted to be buried in ice. He wanted to go on a snowy expedition with Silent Stalker again. Instead, nearing the ferocious white orb of the dying star, he gritted his teeth and spread his burning wings to fight the pull of the Gate of Shadow. His fall slowed, even if only for a moment. But that moment was enough for Sunny to steel himself, and plunge his arm into the stellar flame. The stone-like metal of the jade mantle finally melted. His flesh melted, too. However, even with his bones showing through the blackened flesh, Sunny still willed himself to grasp the fragment of Weaver's lineage hidden in the core of the dying star. He tore it out and wasted a split second to look at what it was. A scroll. It was an elegant scroll made of fine S-Roider silk. There was no time to study it yet, though. Sunny only needed to confirm that this was, indeed, the fragment of Weaver's lineage he had come here to find. And judging by how his blood responded to it, it was. I'll read it later. He would unfold the scroll when the palace was not crumbling around him, when a great titan was not breathing down his neck, and when an army of wraiths was not besieging his Shadow Legion. Even if a small, irrational, and exceedingly curious part of him kept screaming to read the scroll right now. That's all the initial goals of the expedition achieved. Sunny allowed himself to feel a brief moment of satisfaction. He had come to the Eternal City to repair the Night Garden, recover Storm God's lineage, find the sixth piece of Weaver's lineage, and loot some treasure. He had done all that. Now, only one goal remained, one he had discovered after arriving at his destination. Get Nightwalker out of the Eternal City. About that, Sunny released his form, tuning into a vast and shapeless shadow. That made him more susceptible to the pull of the Gate of Shadow, but it also made him far greater, size-wise, so much so that he brushed against the collapsing walls of the void chamber. Powerful tendrils of darkness pierced the jagged metal near one of the rifts in it and pulled him toward it. Sunny had to exert all of his titanic strength, but that helped him avoid the event horizon of the Gate of Shadow and reach the distant wall. There, he built the onyx serpent shell around himself and the shadow of Nightwalker. Pushing his prodigious body into the rift in the wall of the void chamber, Sunny slithered away from its crumbling expanse and burrowed into the maze of tears created in the frame of the palace like a worm burrowing into an apple. The twisting, irregular tunnels moved and changed form, closing and opening as he rushed through them. The molten surface the jade mantle sent rivers of sparks flying as it scraped against the jagged edges of torn metal. It only took him a dozen moments to reach what had been the seal chamber of the collapsing palace once, the great hall where the flesh of Connacht had been imprisoned. It had changed a lot since Sunny left it. The floor of the vast chamber caved, and the pit was oddly deformed. Nightwalk 1 was hanging from its edge, trying to get away from the hills of mold below. Black clouds of spores made the air hazy, and something that seemed like sunlight was pouring from somewhere, illuminating the nightmarish scene with pale light. When Nightwalker saw the head of a giant serpent rise from the darkness of the pit, his eyes widened. What the? He did not finish the sentence, though. Because Sunny opened his maw without ever slowing down. And swallowed him. 2700 Starbeast. Ah, what the hell? Relax. In the cavernous darkness of the giant snake's maw, Nightwalker rolled on something slick and hard, then jumped to his feet. Then, as a nonchalant voice resounded from the shadows around him, he lost his balance and fell again. That was because the dark cave he had found himself in was swaying. That voice, though, why did it sound familiar? Sunless. Slithering through the crumbling corridors of the palace with astonishing speed, Sunny chuckled inwardly. Junctions and intersections flashed past him in a blur, and the walls that groaned and bent threatened to suffocate his shell in a crushing embrace. Yeah, it's me. I just assumed a different form. Welcome to Sunny Express, Lord Nightwalker. Somewhere in his maw, Nightwalker carefully sat up and glanced around with a resentful expression. You could have, it's a metamorphosis ability. I get it. Sunny was confused for a moment. People usually call it the transformation ability, actually. Or one's transcendent form. But how would Nightwalker know? He had been stuck in the Eternal City for decades. There had been no saints during his glory days, let alone colloquial terms to describe things that had to do with transcendence. So, he would have had to come up with his own terminology. Technically, the Onyx Serpent Shell was not Sunny's transcendent ability, but since Nightwalker had not posed his comment as a question, he was under no obligation to explain the difference. Speaking of transcendent abilities, though, as Sunny reached a seemingly bottomless stairwell and sent his serpentine body down its vertical expanse, he realized that he actually knew very little about Nightwalker, aspect and abilities. There had been little time to ask, and it was a sensitive subject anyway. Asking another awakened about their flaw was considered exceedingly rude, while asking them about their aspect could go either way. Colleagues had to share what they could with each other, naturally, but it was always a little awkward. After all, everything you revealed could be used against you. Then again, Cassie definitely knew what Nightwalker was capable of, already. So, Sunny could simply ask her. But why would he when the man was right there? By the way, what is your own transcendent form? Actually, what can your aspect do? Nightwalker hesitated a little, prompting Sunny to add. It's just that we're about to fight a great titan, so I thought I'd be nice to know. His youthful guide sighed. Well, I guess it's only fair. You showed me yours, I show you mine. Sunny almost spat the bastard out. He did not like that phrasing at all. Nightwalker chuckled. My aspect is on the stranger's side, though. It's a bit difficult to wrap your head around. My dormant ability is a form of divination, I suppose. I have this feeling that tells me where to go to get to where I want to go. Or where to find what I am searching for. Like intuition. Sunny nodded mentally. That made sense. It was an understated, but unquestionably powerful ability. In fact, it might just be the most potent dormant ability he had ever heard of, considering what kind of challenges awakened usually faced in the dream realm and in the nightmares. Cassie possessed a similar kind of supernatural intuition, albeit hers was far less specific, and therefore not as powerful. There were benefits to her more vague but general sense, though, because while it did not clearly tell her where to go in any given situation, it did tell her where not to go from time to time. Nightwalker's ability did not, which was a fatal flaw. The man, meanwhile, continued. My awakened ability is, how do I explain it? It's like a magical containment suit. Only there's no suit, it's just that my body becomes isolated from the environment. So, I can be impervious to all hazards for as long as I have essence, cold heat, radiation, contaminants, pressure, and so on. At the same time, my body becomes self-sufficient, producing its own oxygen and nutrients. Something like that. Basically I can go pretty much anywhere without dying, anywhere reasonable or only faintly unreasonable, at least. What the? Sunny vividly imagined Nightwalker just comfortably floating in space in comfortable pajamas, stargazing. For a moment, he felt a hint of envy. That was basically any explorer's dream ability. Lucky bastard. What about your ascended ability? Nightwalker smiled. I can fold space. If Sunny had eyelids at the moment, he would have blinked. Nightwalker shrugged. Simply put, I can fold it to make something long short, or unfold it to make something short long. It's a bit tricky and there's a lot of applications, an infinite amount, really, but with some practice, you can get amazing results. Taking one step and walking 100 meters, for example. That was how we reached the center of the palace so quick, by the way. I folded space to make each of our steps count for a dozen. Sunny felt a strong desire to scowl. No, but how does it even work? And he had not even felt anything peculiar. That's a cheat ability. Not fair. If anyone heard his thoughts at the moment they would have probably commented that hypocrisy had a name. Nightwalker, meanwhile, added with a hint of malice in his voice. Or, I can fold the space that my adversary occupies. Or a body part of theirs. So, it's quite useful in combat, as well. Sunny sighed. No kidding. There was indeed an infinite number of ways that ability could be used, from traversal to fighting to even things like creating hidden storage spaces. If Nightwalker had not been the founder of a great clan, he would have made for a peerless smuggler. So, you transformation. Nightwalker scratched his nose. Well, I call it the Starbeast. Sunny was a little confused. What is that? Nightwalker shrugged. Just like it sounds, a strange beast made of starlight. You know, light is both a particle and a wave. Similarly, my transcendent form can be both tangible and intangible, or shift seamlessly between the two. It's a bit silly, but if there were animals grazing or cosmic radiation and gravity waves while drifting from star to star through the endless dark void, that is what I imagine they would look like. Sunny remained silent for a while. Eventually, he said in a disgruntled tone, "And you were surprised when I turned into a big snake?" Nightwalker blinked a few times. Hey, it's not every day that I am swallowed by giant snakes, okay? He paused for a moment and then raised 3 fingers in indignation. In fact, if one remember correctly, this is at best my 3rd time. Which was 3 times too numerous, as far as he was concerned.